Welcome to the Hill. Matt Gaetz fights for his reputation. Mike Johnson fights for his job as House Speaker. And Donald Trump fights over the Panama Canal. Whatever happened to peace on earth and goodwill toward men? Hello and good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Chris Steyerwalt, filling in for Blake Berman. And this is The Hill on NewsNation. Well, we've got the naughty list. On the eve of Christmas Eve, the House Ethics Committee unwraps an unwanted present for former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. A report released today finds that Gaetz paid for sex on multiple occasions, including with a 17-year-old girl, and purchased and used illegal drugs, all while he was a member of Congress. So what's next for the man who briefly was Donald Trump's nominee to serve as Attorney General?
Matt Gaetz is here. Where's Matt? He's around here someplace. Matt Gaetz. He's got a big career set up. And just want to say hello to Matt.
Is this the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end for Mike Johnson as House Speaker? The bumpy road to a short-term government funding bill Friday solidified his support in most of the Republican conference, but deepened opposition with others. Can he count on the backing of tech billionaire Elon Musk? Maybe the Tesla CEO wants a new gig. But seriously, who would want that job?
The problem with replacing Mike Johnson is that you've got to find somebody in his right mind who wants to take that job.
Plus, if Donald Trump has a snow globe, he's shaking it up right now, sending diplomatic ripples throughout the world. After trolling Canada's prime minister by saying that the Great White North should become our 51st state, Trump is now squeezing Panama for better cargo rates, saying he will demand control of the canal if the Central American country doesn't acquiesce. And when Secretary of State William Seward bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, it was called Seward's Folly. More than 150 years later, Donald Trump has a similar idea, once again proposing a U.S. purchase of Greenland from Denmark. Is it folly or is it foresight? All that on tonight's show. But first, we start with NewsNation Washington correspondent Joe Khalil and the details on the Matt Gaetz ethics report. Joe, you had to dive in. What'd you find?
Yeah, we did. Look, there's a lot in there that is serious, that is very damning. There's a lot of evidence the committee put in. None, I think, more serious than this 17-year-old person. At the time, she was 17 years old. And let's take a look. I'm going to quote this from the report. It says, Victim A, who, again, this 17-year-old girl at the time, recalled getting $400 in cash from Congressman Gaetz that evening, which she understood to be payment for sex. At the time, she just finished her junior year of high school. And that was the most egregious, but obviously it goes on. It also talks about his drug use. And the committee lays out, maybe we didn't know this before because we'd heard about these allegations, Chris, but this wasn't a one-off. This was a 3-year period where Matt Gaetz paid something like $95,000 for at least 12 women to have sex with him. Now, look, we're in an era where we talk about there are potentially no consequences anymore for personal behavior, or at some point you got to think something may stick. Matt Gaetz is defending himself. He's saying that effectively these were girlfriends and that these were legitimate gifts, that there is nothing illegal about that. Members of the ethics committee themselves have, in the last couple of weeks, said things to the effect of, we don't know what kind of political future he may have, but it is important that voters and that the body also understand what these things are, what these allegations are, and what's real and what's not, because that is, part of their job. That's important. So we'll see how this lands, but obviously, again, a lot of pretty disturbing stuff in there.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to do that right before the holiday, but thanks for being here, Joe. We appreciate you, and we will see you later in the show, so please stick around. But joining us right now from his Nebraska district is Republican Congressman Don Bacon. Congressman, welcome. Do you believe the Ethics Committee made the right choice in releasing the Matt Gaetz report, even though he's no longer a member of the House and is no longer the president-elect's nominee to lead the Justice Department? Was this necessary?
What was brought up in front of the whole House, 2 Democrat motions were put forward, and most of us thought if he wasn't being nominated now or he wasn't running for another office, that we should follow precedent, even though there were a couple of times that the Congress has done this anyway. But I think the Ethics Committee believes that he's going to be involved in some other nominations or in other senior positions within the White House. He's talking about running for Senate, so they decided to release it anyway. And I defer to the Ethics Committee on that. That was their choice to make.
Okay. Moving on, Republicans have a very ambitious agenda for next year. But the House Republican majority is going to shrink with Gaetz gone and Elise Stefanik and Mike Waltz taking jobs in the new Trump administration. Republicans will have 217 votes to Democrats 215. That, by my math, is a 0-vote margin until special elections can be held. After what we saw in the spending fight, will Republicans be able to deliver on these promises next year?
You know, the spending fight, we did the right thing in the end. We got government funded. We were able to put money into the disaster funds. We were able to extend the farm bill, but we sure made it painful to get there. And I do think our House Republicans will be more cohesive than the last Congress, because we have three of the most volatile people will not be in it this Congress. And I won't mention who those names are, but you probably know who they are. But so we're going to be a little better off, but we're only going to have a one-seat majority, and we need to have these special elections as soon as we can to get back to 220 to 215 majority. But what this is going to show you, Chris, is that we're going to have a bipartisan spirit generally in the House and in the Senate. We have a bare majorities in both the House and the Senate, and that's just a fact of life. In the Senate, you have to get 60 votes. We're only going to have a 53-47 seat majority there. So I think we've still got to govern from the center to the right and not just from the far right, because the fact is you're not going to get those votes in the House or Senate if you try to govern that way. I heard a couple times this week, we get 100%, the Democrats are going to get 0. It doesn't work that way. James Madison designed a system that forces a consensus building. And so you can't just govern from an extreme position. And even this last week, the Democrats controlled the Senate and the president. So it was unrealistic to think that we could just roll them over.
Okay, there are new reports now that the president-elect is unhappy with Speaker Johnson's performance last week. Does the Speaker have your support, and do you think he'll win another term as Speaker?
He has my support. He's a good man. He works hard. You know, he's trying to get these bills passed with a very small majority. And the fact is, Chris, we have 30 to 40 Republicans who refuse to sign on any continuing resolution or any debt ceiling bill, period. So the Speaker then has to work with Democrats to get 218 votes, and then these 30 or 40 people get mad about it. And I would say to the President Trump to throw this down on the Speaker at the 11th hour and 59th minute that he wanted a debt ceiling raised. This is something that we had to work on for weeks and weeks in advance, and it was just too late to get that done. And it is something that we can get done in reconciliation. And the Speaker has a good plan for how to address the debt ceiling thing. And I think the President should take the Speaker's advice on this. He's got the best path forward.
All right. If you were from Wahoo, Nebraska, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Don Bacon. We thank you. Joining us here on set is Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland. Congressman, welcome. The decision to release this report, the Ethics Committee's chairman and others said, bad precedent, bad idea. Matt Gaetz isn't in the House anymore. This is dirty pool, and it's going to lead to reprisals, that this will be a cycle that will go forward about former members. Why was it necessary in your mind to do this?
Well, just quickly on precedent, I mean, that hasn't happened, based on what's happened in the past. So we've had 4 of these happen in the recent past, in the 80s and 90s, every decade over the past 40 years. And similar circumstances in at least one of the cases. And the decision was made by the House Ethics Committee to release the report, even though a member had left service in the Congress. So there's precedent for it, and, the sky didn't fall. And I think, I got to say, too, that, I've had a good working relationship. I think all of us have on the Ethics Committee, and it's been bipartisan and, largely. And I think I'm not scared about, everything sort of falling apart and all of us turning it on each other and attacking each other and going hardline partisan all of a sudden. I think you start with the Santos case, which I think we handled extremely well. There's a bunch of more low-profile cases in between, but, the staff's been great. The staff's essentially nonpartisan. I think the group has been able to work well together at the member level as well, and I think we'll be able to do that going forward, too.
When former Congressman Madison Cawthorn said that there were wild sex and drug parties happening, members of Congress, I was one of many who said, oh, come on. And then you read this report and you say, well, he wasn't all wrong anyway. Maybe put it this way. Why does it matter to you about reputational harm to Congress? Is that what you're concerned about, is that the esteem of the body is harmed when members are doing things like this?
I mean, to some extent, but I think the larger issues are making sure that the members who are either in the Congress now or will be in the near future understand where we're drawing the lines and how we're calling the balls and strikes, and issuing reports is one way to do that. They get a chance to see how we work through some of these issues, and some of them were obviously over the line, but there's lower level stuff that hasn't gotten the media attention, but it's relevant for members to figure out. And the other part is I really do think the public has a right to know, especially when the allegations are of this magnitude and this nature. It's important for them to have a sense of it. And, sunshine's the best disinfectant.
So turning to less salacious matters, your conference's leader, Hakeem Jeffries, said no help from Democrats is coming to Mike Johnson if he gets stuck trying to win another term as Speaker. So we already have enough dissident Republicans, we already have enough dissident Republicans that they could deny Johnson the speakership. And Hakeem Jeffries says, we're not coming in to bail him out. Is that the right choice?
I mean, we'll see. Hopefully this isn't going to be the same thing we had in my first term. We had these families come up to have their be present at the swearing in, and it took 5 days and 15 votes, and most of them had to go home. But, my hope would be that the Republicans get their act together and figure out how to do these things. I got to say, the handling of the CR last week was not a good omen for things to come. So, and that was because they had a deal. Johnson had made a deal with Hakeem Jeffries. Jeffries had brought it to your conference and said, this is what we're working with. And then that just went away. I think that's a big part. So that was part one. And then, Elon and Donald decide, from the rafters somewhere that they want to kill it. And the Republicans go with that. But phase two, when they rolled out that bill that had the Trump-Musk, things in it, they didn't even call Hakeem before they brought that to the floor. We had to figure it out while he was speaking. And that's ridiculous. If he knows he's going to need us. That's happened major vote after major vote after major vote. Why be so, inappropriate, I would say, in managing things politically, especially when that's how McCarthy got shown the door. So when we got to vote round number 3, we worked it out. We got it done in very short order. Hopefully that's the way it'll work going forward. All right. If you had ever followed your way through holiday traffic in Beltsville, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Glenn Ivey. We thank you and Merry Christmas. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you. Okay, former President Bill Clinton tonight is in a local Washington, D.C. hospital after developing a fever. According to his spokesperson, the 78-year-old former president was admitted this afternoon for testing and observation. The spokesperson says Clinton remains in good spirits. Coming up, the Monroe Doctrine's got nothing on this president-elect. Trump making a play for Greenland and the Panama Canal, but how realistic are his ambitions? Plus, the search for Austin Tice, the U.S. journalist went missing 12 years ago. Now, a high-risk mission for a U.S. delegation that just arrived in Syria. And who's running the show? Trump responds to those claims of President Elon Musk. Stay with us. You're watching The Hill. Welcome back to The Hill. President-elect Trump signaling he wants the United States to pick up some new real estate in his next term. Over the weekend, Trump said he'd demand Panama give back the U.S.-built canal after a generation in Panamanian control if the Central American country doesn't cut its rates on shipping. Well, that got the world's attention. The canal, which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is a pinch point for global trade. About 75% of the goods going through the canal are either coming or going
to the United States. The U.S. controlled that waterway, President Theodore Roosevelt's Big Dig, from its opening day in 1914 until December 31st, 1999, when a treaty ceded control to our allies in Panama City. To the north of our hemisphere, Trump has a friendly takeover in mind. He wants to buy Greenland from the Danes. This morning, Trump calling ownership of the massive ice-covered island an absolute necessity. Joining us now, geography expert Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. All right, Kelly, you've had to take a whirlwind tour of
we've been talking
Western Hemisphere history. What do we know?
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of an unexpected thing that he said this weekend, that he wants Panama back, but this is something that he says we're getting ripped off by Panama.
He says he wants it back he will demand it back.
Yeah.
If they don't lower their rates.
Exactly. He says right now that he believes we're getting ripped off by Panama, and that's something that we know the president-elect doesn't like. He talked about this in his speech in Phoenix, Arizona on Sunday at the America Fest with Turning Point. I want to play a bit of what he had to say.
Ooh.
Has anyone ever heard of the Panama Canal? Because we're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else.
So Panama's president responded to this saying, quote, "Every square meter of the Panama Canal belongs to Panama and will continue to belong to Panama," which then President-elect Trump reposted and said, quote, "We'll see about that." So immediately responding. Panama, as you can imagine, not happy about the threats not being received well. So today in Panama, they were burning a U.S. flag as well as posters of Donald Trump. Mexico's president and China is also throwing their support towards Panama on this. And then, of course, with Greenland, he wants that back. Greenland saying it's not for sale. It will never be for sale.
Not for sale. Okay, the Danes are going to hold the line up there.
That's right.
It's close to the North Pole. You got to be careful. Kelly Meyer, you're the best. Thanks very much. Joining us now is NewsNation political and economic contributor and the former chief of staff to Donald Trump, Mick Mulvaney. Brother Mulvaney, Greenland, it's Danish territory.
You want to start there?
It does have.
We'll start with Greenland.
It does have a prime minister. It does have a prime minister, and he sounds very adamant that the island is not for sale. But the U.S. has a big presence there. We've got a big space facility. It's the most direct route from the United States to Europe. So this is not a crazy idea strategically. No. But is this practical?
It depends on the Danes. Denmark administers it. It's not its own separate country. It's a protectorate. I can't remember the actual classification, but it's a piece of Danish property. And this came up, 4 or 5 years ago now, when we actually started to have discussions about whether or not it might be for sale. And it wasn't something that got shot down right away. Look, the Arctic is an absolutely critical part of geopolitics for the next 100 years. And having a bigger presence there, I think, might be not only in our interest, but in European interest as well. So, look, if there's a way to do something amicably, you can imagine Donald Trump wanting to do a big deal, doing his version of the Louisiana Purchase or Alaska or something like that. And my guess is they'll probably continue to explore whether or not there's something that our friends, the Danes, would like to do with Greenland.
Okay, on the Panama move, this looks a lot like classic Trump, right? He said something that doesn't really mean anything exactly, or it's not precise anyway, but it got everybody talking, everybody anxious. People are burning American flags and pictures of Trump, Kelly told us, in the streets, and gets everybody all riled up. But is this just really a negotiating tactic? Trump creates the threat, this pressure point on Panama to try to get the rates down. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I put this in an entirely different category as Greenland. Greenland, I think, is a negotiation with some folks that we like in Denmark. It came up before. We'll continue to explore whether or not it's viable or not. This is a negotiation. By the way, one of the reasons Trump is so good at negotiating is that it's a credible threat. If he says, look, we are going to have problems with Panama if they don't lower the rates, I don't envision American troops going in to retake the canal. But you got to think that someone's out there scratching their head going, is Donald Trump crazy enough to do something like that? And it's that viable threat that sort of gives him negotiating leverage that not a lot of other folks could ever come up with. So I'll be fascinating to see how that one plays out, because it's going to be sort of difficult it's easy for them to call his bluff and simply say, we're not lowering the rates. And I don't know what the next move on the chessboard is.
Okay, another bit of classic Trump, the return of the bid from the first term to revert Alaska's Mount Denali, which is the tallest peak in North America, to its previous name, Mount McKinley, in honor of Donald Trump's fellow tariff enthusiast, William McKinley.
McKinley was a very good, maybe a great president. They took his name off Mount McKinley, right? That's what they do to people. We're going to bring back the name of Mount McKinley because I think he deserves it.
Okay, it sounds like, at least initially, that Alaskans, especially tribal nations, are happy with the status quo of the past decade. Will Donald Trump get his wish?
Yeah, I didn't have this one on my bingo card. I could have anticipated Greenland. Maybe even if you and I sat down and had a couple beers, we could come up with Panama. I didn't have this one because I can't imagine anybody really cares that much about it. But this is part of the anti-woke, anti-DEI. It was changed away from McKinley to Denali because McKinley was, a white usurper or a white colonialist or whatever you want to call it. And they went back to the traditional name. And Trump is simply trying to this is part and parcel of that anti-woke movement that Trump rode to victory a couple of months back. So I think this one actually probably could take place. Who cares? I mean, who really cares what it's called? I don't even know if most people in the nation know what it is. And I'm certainly sure that not many people know who President McKinley was. So this is just sort of something for Trump to talk about when he's waiting for something else to focus on.
Don't take any trips up to Skagway anytime soon, Mick. I'd be careful up there. But thank you very much for your time, and have a very Merry Christmas, my friend. There is still much more ahead on the Hill. Commutation controversy after President Biden spares 37 federal death row inmates from execution. Plus, will the United States find missing journalist Austin Tice? One activist whose father died while being held in Syria joins us live on the other side of the break. And have you heard people calling the world's richest man President Musk? How is Donald Trump responding to that? We'll find out when we come back.
Have you pleaded to this indictment, sir? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
That was Luigi Mangione pleading not guilty to murder charges at a New York courthouse earlier today. The suspected killer of the UnitedHealthcare CEO faces 11 charges, including first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. His lawyers say his rights are being violated. Joining us now is Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host. Jesse, what is going on today?
So it was a big day. First of all, to hear Luigi Mangione's voice is something we hadn't seen before. Also to have cameras in a New York courtroom, that's a rarity, but this is also kind of a rare case. And this was an initial hearing where he's read the charges, he understands his rights, and ultimately he pled not guilty. Now, I think it's significant because his attorneys have made a big issue of what we're looking at right now, the way he is going through this perp walk, which we saw also last week, the way he was being escorted outside that helicopter. And while they're saying, look, the more this gets amplified, the more that you see this, how on earth can he get a fair and impartial jury? I actually think it's interesting the defense is saying that, because I actually think it's a worry for the prosecution. If you see the fanfare and the support that he is getting right now, I think it's a big concern for the prosecutors if they can get a fair and impartial jury, somebody on there who wouldn't be sympathetic to him, who wouldn't be a stealth juror, that wouldn't look at the facts and the evidence, but would just want to acquit him because they believe in what he allegedly did, or, listen, optics, the way he looks. This is a real issue that has to be considered now by both sides.
Okay, let's listen to Mangione's lawyer criticizing the way the case has been handled.
He was on display for everyone to see in the biggest staged perp walk I've ever seen in my career. It was absolutely unnecessary. He's been cooperative with law enforcement. He had been in custody for over a week. It was like perfectly choreographed. And what was the New York City mayor doing at this press conference?
But to your point, Jesse, that actually might increase sympathy for him. It might help him in a jury pool because he has his many admirers.
And remember, there was a statement released last week by his attorney where he said, I appreciate all the support. Let me just say this real quick about all the attention there and Mayor Adams. Look, aside from a photo op, because who doesn't want a photo op here, this is a real concern that somebody might want to jump in and help him. There's a real security risk here. So I don't blame authorities for being this amped up and having so many different agents around him. The amount of attention surrounding him, the uproar you're seeing online, I think it's a real significant security risk. And by the way, the reason they're charging him so aggressively and maybe doing, having the mayor come out is because they don't want copycats. They don't want anybody to think this is okay. He's being charged incredibly aggressively at the federal and state level. Might not work, but he's facing potentially life in prison and maybe the death penalty.
Oh, speaking of the death penalty, President Biden today announced that he is commuting 37 federal death row inmates. These people are not going to be released from prison. They're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison, but he's taking the death penalty off the table. What's behind that decision?
So he says it's based on his moratorium against federal executions. There might be a religious component here. Here's the problem when you commute sentences. How do you choose which ones? So you say that the people who murdered police officers and military members and those killed in drug deals and robberies, you're going to commute their sentences, but then the ones who were killed as a form of terrorism or hate-motivated crimes, which are awful, how do you weigh that? Either you commute all the sentences or you don't commute any. And I think that's the problem that President Biden finds himself in now. Yeah,
he didn't commute the sentences of the Boston bombers from and others that were high-profile crimes, but on these other ones he did. There you have it. Jesse Weber, thanks very much for being with us.
Of course.
U.S. authorities just met with leaders of the new regime in Syria and say they are being helpful in the search for U.S. journalist Austin Tice, who has been missing for 12 years. U.S. officials say they believe Tice is still alive.
Our job in the U.S. government is to keep pressing and pressing and pressing to find out Austin's location, his disposition, his status, and to bring him home.
Okay, the U.S. and representatives of the new Syrian regime jointly searched a jail on Friday where they thought Tice might be held. They didn't find concrete evidence of his whereabouts, but it was part of a renewed effort to locate him. Joining us now is Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Congressman, welcome and thank you. Is there really hope now in the U.S. government that Austin Tice is alive after all of this?
Every lead and every shred of hope needs to be pursued when there's an American wrongfully held overseas. The Biden administration is rightfully prioritizing this. It's not the only thing that the Biden administration needs to pursue in Syria. Also need to ensure that ISIS or other terrorist elements are not given safe harbor. Need to ensure that HTS or any governance element is going to respect the rights of minority groups, including the Kurds and women, and, of course, need to ensure that Syria is going to adopt a position of non-belligerence to other countries, most notably Israel. But this is top of the list.
Okay, so the relationship that you're talking about, hopefully a constructive relationship with the new regime in Syria, is part of a changed region. As the Biden administration in these last few weeks is pushing for a ceasefire with Hamas and Israel, we're seeing representatives of the new Trump team meeting with the Israelis, Saudis, and other officials in the region. The old maxim in Washington was that there was only one president at a time. Are you comfortable with this two-track approach?
So long as it's being coordinated between the outgoing and incoming administrations. I think it's notable that the Middle East is in the most hopeful position it has been since October 7th, 2023. And it's in that position because Joe Biden ignored both the hard left and the extreme right. He ignored calls for a unilateral ceasefire that would have disarmed Israel and strengthened Hamas. He allowed and supported Israel to strike Hezbollah and Iran, which allowed for Syria to unravel in the way that it has and has set up these negotiations for hostages in Gaza. He also pushed back on the extreme right that was calling for American bombs being dropped directly on Iran, which would have been, I think, preemptive and overly belligerent at that time. So Joe Biden has threaded this needle successfully. The Middle East, of course, is a volatile and combustible place, but it's in a better place now than at any time since October 7th.
Okay, the Wall Street Journal has recently reported new details on how the White House functioned or maybe failed to function around the limitations of a diminished Joe Biden, including some disconcerting details about the run-up to the Afghanistan withdrawal. How concerned are you about the way foreign policy was and is being handled by this White House?
I think Joe Biden's foreign policy record is going to gain luster over time, and I'll give you a few examples. First, the rapprochement between South Korea and Japan, coupled with stronger ties with the United States and Philippines, stronger ties with the United States and Australia, stronger ties with the United States and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has really constrained Chinese belligerence in the Indo-Pacific, and that's a strong foundation upon which future administrations can build. Additionally, Joe Biden has strengthened, deepened the resolve of NATO against the unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The reporting on this war in Ukraine is making it seem as though Russia is making these galloping advances. It's not. It is stuck in all but one oblast and is sacrificing tens of thousands of casualties for every square kilometer gained. And the United States really has demonstrated its resolve not just to the Kremlin, but to Beijing and to Tehran as well.
Congressman, we thank you for making time for us on this holiday week. We appreciate it. If you were from Rentham, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Jake Auchincloss. We thank you. Meantime, as American negotiators continue to search for journalist Austin Tice, they are also looking for answers about the deaths of other Americans who were wrongfully held in Syria. In May, just a few weeks before her father was confirmed dead after being held hostage for 7 years, our next guest brought her plea before the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Imagine for us as a family, not knowing anything about your loved one for 7 years. If anything did happen to my father, then I know it would be a form of torture, a form of execution, possibly murder.
Myram Kamal-Maz joins us now from Texas. Ma'am, thank you for being here. You've been in touch, I know, with Austin Tice's family. What are they going through?
Oh, it is not easy. It is very painful, excruciatingly painful. I can't imagine going through what they're going through for 12 years. I had to go through with it for 7.5 years, and I can say I had sleepless nights. It was horrific, trying to think of the next way to find our loved one, to find out any information about him, if he's alive or not. So my heart goes out to Austin Tice's family. I feel for them. I love Deborah, and I wish them peace and closure, and that Austin makes it home safely and he's back between their arms very soon.
I know it must be very painful for you to relive your family's difficult experience of these many years. And now your sense of loss. But I know you do it because you're trying to call attention to the plight of other families. Are you now optimistic that with the fall of the Assad regime, that there will finally be answers, there'll finally be closure?
Absolutely. The Assad regime has done an excellent job at being very secretive. They hide any form of evidence very well. And it was very difficult for us to learn anything about my father had it not been for the U.S. government. So I am very optimistic now that we will find out who it is exactly that had killed my father and who ordered for it to happen. We plan to hold them accountable for it. So I am very optimistic about what will come forward after the fall of the Assad regime.
And are you optimistic for a stable future for Syria? Do you have hope in that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really hope so. I think that is every Syrian's dream, to see a free Syria, to be able to travel there. I was banned from going to Syria just because I spoke out about my father. That was a way of having myself put on the list of wanted just because I spoke out about my father's detention in Syria and then his death, speaking about the government in any negative way. I was warned, do not go to Syria. You could be yourself detained and killed just for speaking out. So to see that that is over now and we are all free and able to go to Syria is so exciting, so thrilling. We're just so excited to be able to finally go and see Syria.
Oh, ma'am, thank you for sharing that good news with us here tonight. We appreciate your time. Coming up.
Thank you.
He helped to avoid a government shutdown, but is Mike Johnson in danger of losing his job as House Speaker? And who the heck would replace him? The full panel joins us next.
He's seen it all in 50 years. Now, legendary columnist George Will is also telling it all to NewsNation.
The best is still in front of us. Things are going to be all right.
George Will on America, Christmas Eve at 8/7 Central, only on NewsNation.
Down averted the question today, how secure is the job of House Speaker Mike Johnson? With the full panel now, huzzah, huzzah. A. Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor. Joe Khalil is back, Washington correspondent for NewsNation. Say hello to Emily Brooks. She's a congressional reporter for TheHill.com. And Hogan Gidley, former deputy press secretary in the first Trump administration and now consultant to House Speaker Mike Johnson. Okay, so Emily, you've written all about this. You've been tracking the drama. What's going on?
Well, there are a number of Republicans who are not happy with Speaker Johnson, how this was handled, and particularly in light of Trump demanding this debt ceiling deal. They're trying to figure out how to respond to that deal, maybe have some spending cuts and some major pieces of
legislation. So these are Freedom Caucus these are the people, the 34, I think, who voted against the bill.
Absolutely. And, the important thing to remember is Speaker Johnson can only afford to lose one vote on that January 3rd speaker's vote. Assuming that everybody is voting for a candidate, you already have one person, Thomas Massie, saying that he's not going to vote for Speaker Johnson. And so now there's a danger that there could be more. And a couple of Freedom Caucus members, in light of the chaos around the debt limit and the funding deal from last week, have said that they're not sure if they're going to support him on the floor.
I couldn't help but laugh yesterday when I was talking to Congressman Tom McClintock from California. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The problem with replacing Mike Johnson is that you've got to find somebody in his right mind who wants to take that job. and anybody who wants it obviously isn't in his right mind.
Okay, so that's the thing, is everybody says anybody, but you can't beat somebody with nobody, right? You got to have a person. So who is the person? Is this Jim Jordan? Who are we talking about?
So, I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that question. Jim Jordan is an obvious one that comes to mind just because he's so close to Trump.
And he
does
tried
have
before.
A lot of respect.
He tried before?
Yeah, he and I actually asked him that question. He said, I'm a Mike Johnson guy, but he is until he isn't, right? Honestly, I think what we've learned over the last year, Republicans did so well in the election that I think we've forgotten that is an impossible conference to lead. Mike Johnson is in an impossible spot.
He has a zero.
And his position only gets worse in the next couple of weeks when we get into January, and that impossibly small margin gets smaller. So it's a good point. Who wants that job? Who can do that job?
Hogan Gidley. America needs to see this beautiful footage here of you. If you look here in the background, there he is.
This is the second time.
This is the grassy knoll. This is you back there, looking sharp as always. We show that just to prove your bona fides as a person, the man in the room. Yes. You've worked for Donald Trump, and now you've worked for the speaker. What is this dynamic here? Donald Trump, we're hearing the whispered reports that Trump is briefing against him. Break this down for us.
Okay, first and foremost, I do not speak on behalf of Mike Johnson, nor do I speak on behalf of Donald Trump anymore. However, it's pretty clear what the House is trying to do, which is you can use whatever cliche or euphemism, clear the decks, clear the runway for Donald Trump to take control of the White House and then have control of the Senate and the House in a unified government. And what Donald Trump wants to do is pretty obvious. He obviously wants to secure the border, and he wants to raise the debt limit. That is going to be one of the first packages they try to implement through reconciliation, so they don't need Democrats. As we now know, though, that margin is very slim and very tight. And it's not a news flash that someone from the Freedom Caucus doesn't like something going on Capitol Hill. That's their whole mantra. But the difference now is most of that caucus, most of the House, quite frankly, 70%, never had unified government, and they've never had Donald Trump as president. Buckle up, because he's going to call the plays, and it's up to the House to run those plays. And if they don't, the blowback, I would imagine, from MAGAverse is going to be pretty big.
Okay, Scott, we heard Glenn Ivey, who is very nice, who is a very genteel person, but making it very clear that there were going to be no Democrats there to bail out Mike Johnson. If he loses those Republicans on a vote for Speaker, they're not going to rescue him as they did and thought about doing for Kevin McCarthy and others in the past.
He's absolutely right. But here's what the Republicans have not learned, right? Because you said they learned this and that and the other. What they have not learned is that Mike Johnson is not the problem. You know the problem? Who the problem is? The 34 Freedom Caucus members and others who don't want to compromise. And as a result, because they don't want to compromise on a lot of these issues and they're feeling themselves, then Johnson's got to do a deal with the Democrats. And it's almost like shared government in the House of Representatives unless Trump makes everyone on the Senate and House side the Trumpettes, if you will, and he gets to really drive his agenda as the voters want him to do.
Right.
But until that happens, after January 20th, we'll see. The problem is those 34 House of Representatives who don't want to compromise. It's not Mike Johnson, and I'm no fan of Mike Johnson, but that's just reality.
Donald Trump's going to put that picture of Andrew Jackson back in the Oval Office. Remember what Andrew Jackson said? One man with courage makes a majority. That's what's good. There's going to be a lot of questions. Going to be a lot of questions in the House. But coming up, what would you put under the Christmas tree at Mar-a-Lago? Our panel, the best-dressed panel in Washington, plays Santa for the president-elect. And On Balance is coming up in just a few minutes. Elizabeth Pran is filling in for Leland Vittert. She'll talk with Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, on what has turned out to be a very newsy Christmas Eve. That's at 7 p.m. right here on NewsNation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Hill. Retail experts say this is the busiest shopping day of the year. But what do you get the man who has everything, including a return trip to the White House panel? Scott, starting with you, what would you get Donald Trump for Christmas?
There is actually a book called Constitutional Law for Dummies. Where's the camera?
We don't have the rights to that. You can't shoot that.
Well, I'm showing the panel.
Yeah.
Constitutional Law for Dummies, because when he gets in, he's going to break every constitutional law or try to as he pushes forth his agenda.
Joe Khalil.
So I was back and forth between Tums and Advil, but I went with Advil because he is, as we just mentioned last block, he's going to have to deal with this Congress. It's going to be a lot harder for him than he thinks. Mr. President-elect, rely on the Advil.
Ma'am.
The best gift you could possibly get is the opportunity for a sit-down interview with The Hill.
Shameless. Wow. That is shameless, and I love it.
And every congressman is also going to have
I love your shamelessness, Hogan. 30 seconds.
I just was thinking because it's Christmas time, I wanted a color theme thing. I thought green tie, I would give him Greenland. That's what I would give him.
He would say it's very nice.
I know it's
very nice.
Okay. He's a land guy.
Thanks for watching The Hill on NewsNation.